Margaret Chen had built her empire on numbers, profit margins, quarterly projections, shareholder value. At 42, she commanded boardrooms with surgical precision, her silence more powerful than most people's words. But when 8-year-old Diego Martinez handed her a crayon drawing of her smiling, something she hadn't done genuinely in years fell before she could stop them. The boy's father, night janitor Luis Martinez, watched from the hallway, clutching his cleaning cart. Neither knew this moment would shatter everything Margaret thought she understood about success, family, and the bridges we burn climbing toward empty peaks. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The 37th floor hummed with the kind of silence that money bought. Margaret Chen's corner office overlooked downtown Seattle, rain streaking the floor-to-ceiling windows like tears the city refused to cry. She sat motionless behind her mahogany desk, reading quarterly reports by the glow of her monitor, the numbers bleeding together in neat rows of achievement. 9:47 p.m. The building had emptied hours ago, executives fleeing to suburban homes and dinner reservations she would never keep. Margaret preferred the emptiness, preferred the clean lines of solitude to the messy complications of human interaction. Her phone buzzed. David's name lit the screen. She let it ring. The cleaning cart's wheels squeaked in the hallway beyond her office door, a sound so familiar it had become part of the building's heartbeat. Luis Martinez, she knew without looking. 5 nights a week for 3 years, he moved through these halls like a ghost, invisible to everyone except the security cameras and Margaret's peripheral awareness. She never spoke to him. Professional courtesy demanded acknowledgement, but Margaret had perfected the art of looking through people rather than at them. It was easier that way. Cleaner. The squeaking stopped outside her door. "Excuse me?" Margaret's fingers paused over her keyboard. The voice was small, uncertain, definitely not Luis. "Ms. Chen?" She looked up. A boy stood in her doorway, maybe 8 years old, wearing a rumpled Superman t-shirt and jeans with grass stains at the knees. His dark hair stuck up in several directions, and he clutched a piece of paper against his chest like armor. "You shouldn't be here." The words came out sharper than she intended. The boy took a half step backward but didn't run. "My papa said you're the boss lady, the one who makes all the important decisions." Margaret's throat constricted. No one had called her anything but Miss Chen or Margaret in years. Certainly not boss lady. "Where is your father?" "Getting supplies from the closet." The boy gestured vaguely down the hall. "I'm Diego Martinez, Luis's son." Margaret had seen him once before, sleeping in the break room while his father worked late shifts. She'd made a mental note to speak to HR about family policies, then promptly forgot. "You still shouldn't be here, Diego. This is a workplace." "I know." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "But I made you something." He held out the paper, standard copy paper, wrinkled from small hands. Margaret stared at it without moving. "I don't." "It's you," Diego said, stepping closer despite her obvious discomfort. "Papa told me you work really hard and don't have time for friends, so I thought maybe you'd like a picture of yourself being happy." Margaret's breath caught. The drawing was crude, executed in crayon with the confident imprecision of childhood. A stick-figure woman stood behind a desk, arms raised in celebration. Yellow sun rays emanated from her head like a crown. Her smile was a simple, curved line, but somehow it captured something Margaret had forgotten she possessed. "See?" Diego pointed to the figure's face. "You're smiling. Papa says you never smile at work, but I bet you smile sometimes. Everyone smiles sometimes." Margaret's vision blurred. She blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, hot and unexpected, rolling down her cheeks before she could stop them. "Oh." Diego's voice grew smaller. "Did I make you sad?" "I didn't mean to make you sad." "No, you." Margaret's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, tried again. "You didn't make me sad." She reached for the drawing with trembling fingers. The paper felt impossibly light, as if it might dissolve at her touch. "Papa!" Luis appeared in the doorway, mop bucket in hand. His face went pale when he saw his son standing next to Margaret's desk, saw the tears on her cheeks. Diego, no. I told you to wait in the break room. He set down the bucket and moved toward his son. I'm so sorry, Miss Chen. He won't bother you again. It's... Margaret started, then stopped. The drawing trembled in her hands. Luis placed a protective hand on Diego's shoulder. Come on, Mijo. Miss Chen is very busy. But she's crying, Diego said, looking between his father and Margaret with genuine concern. Did I do something wrong? Margaret looked at the boy, really looked at him. His eyes held the kind of openness she remembered having once, before boardrooms and hostile takeovers taught her to armor herself against the world. No, she said quietly. You did something very right. Luis frowned, uncertain. His cleaning uniform was pressed and clean despite the late hour, his work boots polished. Everything about him spoke of dignity maintained against long odds. I should get him out of your way, Luis said. Wait. The word escaped before Margaret could stop it. Both Luis and Diego turned to look at her. How old are you, Diego? 8 3/4. And do you come here often? Diego glanced at his father, seeking permission. Luis nodded reluctantly. Sometimes, Diego said, when Mama has to work her second job and can't watch me. Papa brings me here and I do homework in the break room. I promise I'm quiet. I don't touch anything. Margaret felt something crack open in her chest, a fault line she'd spent years reinforcing. What's your favorite subject in school? Art, Diego answered immediately. And math. I'm really good at both. Papa says maybe I could work in a place like this someday, but not cleaning. He says I could be the boss of my own company. Luis's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Margaret caught it. The weight of dreams carried on tired shoulders, the careful balance between hope and realism that every parent knew. Your father is a smart man, Margaret said. She stood up, moved around her desk. Diego tilted his head back to look at her, unintimidated by her height or her reputation. Thank you for the drawing, she said, kneeling down to his eye level. I'm going to put it right here on my desk where I can see it every day. Diego's face lit up. Really? Really? She meant it. For the first time in years, Margaret Chen meant something that had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic planning. Diego, Luis said gently, we need to let Miss Chen get back to work. Of course. Margaret stood, smoothing her skirt. The professional mask slipped back into place, but not completely. Thank you both. For this. She held up the drawing, and Diego beamed. Maybe next time I could draw your whole office, he said as his father guided him toward the door. With the pretty view and everything. Maybe, Margaret said. After they left, she stood alone in her office, holding the drawing. The building's silence felt different now, less like sanctuary, more like isolation. She walked to her desk and propped the drawing against her monitor, studying the crude crayon lines. The stick figure woman looked absurdly happy, arms flung wide in celebration of something unnamed. Margaret touched her own face, feeling the salt tracks of tears already drying. When was the last time she'd smiled like that? When was the last time she'd smiled at all? Her phone buzzed again. David's name, persistent as always. This time, she answered. Margaret? Finally. I've been calling all evening. I was in a meeting. This late? Never mind. Listen, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you meet me for dinner tomorrow? That new place on Pine Street? Margaret looked at the drawing, at the simple joy radiating from crayon lines. I don't think so, David. What do you mean? We talked about this. The partnership opportunity with Hutchinson Associates. I said no. Silence on the line. Margaret could picture David's face, the calculation behind his eyes as he recalibrated his approach. Margaret, what's going on? You've been distant lately. More than usual. I need to go. Wait. She hung up. The rain had intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Margaret walked to the glass wall and pressed her palm against the cool surface, watching the city blur and reform in the water's distortion. Somewhere below, Luis was probably finishing his rounds, preparing to take his son home to whatever cramped apartment they could afford on a janitor's salary. Diego would do homework at a kitchen table, maybe draw more pictures while his father helped with math problems and spelling words. Margaret closed her eyes. She remembered being 8, remembered the careful way her own father had corrected her multiplication tables, his calloused hands gentle despite the factory grease under his fingernails. Remembered her mother humming while she cooked dinner on their tiny stove, the way the apartment smelled like garlic and hope. When had she stopped remembering? Her reflection stared back from the rain-streaked window, a successful woman in an expensive suit, master of an empire built on other people's labor. The stick figure in Diego's drawing looked nothing like her, and everything like who she used to be. Margaret returned to her desk and opened her laptop. Instead of quarterly reports, she pulled up the employee database, typing in Luis Martinez's information. Luis Martinez, night custodial staff, employed 3 years, 2 months. Previous employer, Bellingham Cleaning Services. Emergency contact, Maria Martinez, wife. Dependents: Diego Martinez, son. Age 8. Salary: $28,000 annually. Margaret stared at the number, $28,000. She spent more than that on business lunches in a quarter. She minimized the database and pulled up her personal financial records. Investment accounts, stock portfolios, real estate holdings. Numbers that had once thrilled her with their steady upward climb now felt abstract, disconnected from anything that mattered. Her desk phone rang. The internal line. "Miss Chen, this is Jerry from security. I've got Luis Martinez down here asking to see you. Says it's about his son." Margaret's pulse quickened. "Send him up." She closed her laptop and straightened the drawing against her monitor, then immediately guessed the gesture. Too familiar. Too personal. She left it where it was. Luis knocked softly on her doorframe. "Come in." He entered hesitantly, hat in his hands. "Miss Chen, I wanted to apologize again for Diego bothering you. I know you're busy and he wasn't bothering me." Luis stopped mid-sentence. "Your son?" Margaret continued. "He's very talented. The drawing. It meant something to me. He likes to draw. Spends hours at it when he should be doing other things." Luis smiled despite his obvious discomfort. His mother, she encourages it. Says art is important even if it doesn't pay the bills. She's right. Luis studied Margaret's face, searching for some hidden agenda. Finding none, he relaxed slightly. "He likes you," Luis said. "Keeps asking if the nice lady liked his picture." "The nice lady?" "That's what he calls you. Says you have kind eyes." Margaret felt the fault line in her chest widen. "Luis," she said carefully, "how long have you been working here?" 3 years, 4 months, next week." "And before that?" "Different places. Offices, mostly. Some retail after hours." Luis shifted his weight. "Is there a problem with my work? Because I can?" "No, no problem." Margaret leaned forward. "Tell me about Diego. What does he want to be when he grows up?" Luis's face softened. "Changes every week. Last month it was astronaut. This month it's artist. But he's good with numbers too, really good. His teacher says he's gifted. What about you? What do you want for him?" "Everything I didn't have." The words came out quietly, carrying the weight of every parent's deepest hope. "College, options, a chance to use his brain instead of his back." Margaret nodded, understanding more than Luis could know. "College is expensive," she said. "We're saving. Every month. It's slow, but we're saving." At $28,000 a year, Margaret thought, it would be glacial. Impossible, more likely. "Luis, can I ask you something personal?" He tensed. "Okay. Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. He frowned, considering. "Happy?" He glanced around the expensive office, as if the answer might be hidden in the mahogany paneling. "I have a job. My family is healthy. My son is smart and kind, I suppose. Yes, I'm happy enough." Happy enough. Margaret had never once described herself as happy enough. Successful, yes. Accomplished, certainly. But happy? "Thank you," she said, "for bringing Diego tonight. For the drawing." "Miss Chen?" Luis hesitated at the doorway. "If you don't mind me asking, are you happy?" The question hung in the air between them, honest and unexpected. Margaret looked at the drawing, at the stick figure woman with her arms flung wide in celebration. "I'm working on it," she said. After Luis left, Margaret sat in her office until nearly midnight, staring at the crayon drawing and thinking about 8-year-old boys with dreams bigger than their circumstances. Thinking about fathers who pressed uniforms at midnight, and mothers who worked 2 jobs to pay for art supplies. Thinking about the difference between success and happiness, between achievement and joy. When she finally locked her office and headed for the elevator, she carried the drawing with her. At home in her downtown Condot 1,000 square feet of minimalist perfection overlooking Elliott Bay, Margaret propped the drawing on her kitchen counter and made herself a cup of tea. The stick figure woman smiled back at her, arms raised in triumph over some unnamed victory. Margaret touched her own lips. Trying to remember how to smile like that, it felt like learning a foreign language she'd forgotten how to speak. End of part 1, ready for part 2. Margaret woke at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of rain against her bedroom windows. The drawing sat on her nightstand, where she'd placed it before sleep, Diego's crayon sun still radiating joy in the gray morning light. She dreamed of her father again, the first time in years. His hands teaching her to tie her shoes, his voice reading bedtime stories in accented English, his pride when she brought home straight A's. Dreams that felt more like accusations. What would he think of who you've become? Margaret pushed the thought away and reached for her phone. 17 missed calls from David, 6 voicemails she didn't want to hear. She deleted them without listening. The shower was scalding, the way she liked it hot enough to wash away the residue of unwanted memories. But today the heat couldn't quite reach the cold place that had taken root in her chest. By 7 a.m. she was dressed in her armor, charcoal Armani suit, Italian leather heels, the kind of understated luxury that whispered power without needing to shout. She studied herself in the full-length mirror, noting the sharp lines of her silhouette, the perfect angles of her hair. Professional, untouchable, empty. The drawing caught her eye in the reflection, propped against her jewelry box, where she'd moved it while getting ready. The stick figure woman looked absurdly out of place among Margaret's designer accessories, like a child's laugh in a cathedral. Margaret picked it up, studying the crude crayon lines. Diego had drawn her arms so wide they nearly touched the edges of the paper, as if her joy was too large to contain. When was the last time I felt anything too large to contain? She folded the drawing carefully and slipped it into her briefcase. The drive to the office took 25 minutes through Seattle's morning gridlock. Margaret usually used the time for conference calls, maximizing every moment of productivity. Today she drove in silence, watching commuters in adjacent car-stirred faces behind windshields, everyone rushing toward something that probably wouldn't make them happy. The Meridian Tower rose 37 floors above downtown, glass and steel reaching toward clouds that never seemed to part. Margaret's company, Chen Dynamics, occupied the top 5 Florsa software consulting firm she'd built from nothing into a $70 million enterprise. Her parking space was reserved, marked with her name in neat bronze letters. VP spaces flanked hers on either side, empty at this early hour. Margaret sat in her BMW for a moment after turning off the engine, studying the building that represented everything she'd worked to achieve. It looked different somehow. Colder. The elevator ride to the 37th floor was smooth and silent. Margaret watched the floor numbers climb, each one carrying her further from whatever she'd felt the night before. By the time the doors opened, the professional mask was firmly in place. "Good morning, Miss Chen." Rebecca, her assistant, looked up from her desk with practiced efficiency. 26 years old, MBA from Wharton, the kind of ambitious intelligence Margaret recognized because she'd once possessed it herself. "Any urgent messages?" David Hutchinson called 4 times. "Says it's about the partnership proposal." He sounded frustrated. Margaret's jaw tightened. "Hold my calls until 9. I need an hour." "Of course. Oh, And facilities management wants to speak with you about the night custodial staff. Something about policy violations? Margaret stopped walking. What kind of violations? Rebecca consulted her tablet. Children on premises after hours. Apparently one of the janitors has been bringing his son to work. Security flagged it as a liability issue. The cold place in Margaret's chest spread outward. Which janitor? Rebecca scrolled through her notes. Martinez. Luis Martinez. Margaret felt the world tilt slightly. Cancel my 9 o'clock. I need to speak with facilities immediately. But Miss Chen, you have the board presentation. Cancel it. Rebecca's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. I'll reschedule everything. Margaret closed her office door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Through the interior windows, she could see her employees, arriving software engineers and project managers and business analysts, all of them building careers on the foundation she'd laid. How many of them had children? How many juggled babysitter schedules and sick days and the impossible mathematics of work-life balance? She'd never bothered to ask. Her phone buzzed. David again. This time she answered. We need to talk, he said without preamble. Good morning to you too. Don't be cute, Margaret. You hung up on me last night. You're not returning calls, and now Rebecca tells me you've canceled the board meeting? What the hell is going on? Margaret looked at Diego's drawing, now propped against her monitor where it belonged. I'm reevaluating some things. Reevaluating what? The biggest opportunity of your career? The chance to merge with Hutchinson Sup Associates and create the premier consulting firm on the West Coast? Maybe I don't want to be premier anymore. Silence stretched between them. Margaret could picture David in his corner office across town, calculating his next move. Margaret, we've been together for 2 years. I know you better than anyone. You don't say things you don't mean. Do you know me? Margaret thought. Do I know myself? I have to go, she said. Wait. Have dinner with me tonight. We'll talk this through properly. I can't. Can't? Or won't? Margaret touched the drawing's crayon sun. Does it matter? She hung up before he could answer. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. Tom Brennan from Facilities Management stood in the doorway, tablet in hand, and the practiced look of someone about to deliver bad news. Miss Chen, you wanted to see me about the Martinez situation? Come in. Close the door. Tom settled into the chair across from her desk, his expression carefully neutral. So, Margaret said, tell me about this policy violation. Right. Well, it's pretty straightforward. Company policy prohibits non-employees on premises after hours without proper authorization. Security flagged several instances of Martinez bringing his son to work. Several instances? Over the past few months, yes. The boy stays in the break room while Martinez completes his rounds. No damage to property, no disruption to operations, but it's still a liability issue. Margaret leaned back in her chair. What are you recommending? Standard protocol would be a written warning for the first offense, termination for any subsequent violations. Termination. It's in the employee handbook, clearly stated. Margaret opened her laptop and pulled up the company policy manual loan 186 pages of rules and regulations she'd approved but never really read. Section 15.3. Unauthorized personnel on company property. Employees may not bring family members, friends, or other non-authorized individuals onto company premises during or after business hours without express written permission from management. The language was clear, unambiguous. Protective of the company's interests, utterly devoid of humanity. Tom, Margaret said carefully, do you have children? The question seemed to catch him off guard. 2 daughters. Why? What do you do when your babysitter cancels? When your wife has to work late? Tom shifted uncomfortably. Well, we have family nearby. My mother-in-law usually helps out. And if you didn't have family? If you couldn't afford backup childcare? I suppose I'd have to figure something out. Like bringing your child to work? Tom was quiet for a moment, understanding dawning in his expression. Miss Chen, I get it, I really do. But policy is policy. If we make exceptions for one employee, then what? The company crumbles? Our insurance rates skyrocket? It's about consistency. Fairness. Margaret studied Tom's face middle management earnestness, the careful balance of empathy and corporate loyalty that defined his career. How much do we pay Luis Martinez? Custodial staff starts at $28,000 annually. And how much did we spend on the company retreat last year? Tom consulted his tablet. The executive retreat in Napa? Approximately $45,000. For 2 days. Yes, ma'am. Margaret did the math. Luis's entire yearly salary was less than what they'd spent on wine and massage therapists for 20 executives who already made 6 figures. Tell me about Luis's work performance. Exemplary. Never missed a shift, premises are always spotless, no complaints from staff. He's actually one of our best. So, we want to fire our best janitor because he's trying to be a good father. Tom's shoulders sagged slightly. When you put it like that, how else should I put it? Margaret stood and walked to her window, looking down at the city below. People hurried along sidewalks like ants, each carrying their own invisible burdens. Tom, I want you to draft a new policy. Family emergency childcare provisions. Employees facing unexpected childcare situations may bring their children to work, provided they remain in designated areas and don't interfere with operations. Ms. Chen, the liability issues can be addressed with proper documentation and insurance adjustments. Make it happen. Tom made notes on his tablet, his expression carefully neutral. And Tom, I want to see Luis Martinez in my office this afternoon. To discuss the policy violation? Margaret looked at Diego's drawing. To discuss his future. After Tom left, Margaret sat alone with her thoughts and the growing certainty that something fundamental had shifted inside her. The drawing seemed to pulse with life on her desk, a beacon of possibility in the sterile corporate environment she'd created. Her intercom buzzed. Miss Chen? There's a Maria Martinez here to see you. She says it's about her husband and son? Margaret's pulse quickened. Send her up. Maria Martinez was small and fierce, with calloused hands and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She wore scrubs clearly coming from or going to a hospital shift and carried herself with the dignity of someone who worked multiple jobs to keep her family afloat. Miss Chen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I heard there might be trouble about Diego coming to work with Luis. Please, sit down. Maria perched on the edge of the chair, ready to fight for her family if necessary. I want you to know, she continued, Diego is a good boy. He doesn't touch anything, doesn't make noise. I work nights at the hospital 3 times a week, and we can't afford. Mrs. Martinez. Margaret's voice was gentle. You're not in trouble. Maria blinked, confusion replacing defensiveness. I'm not? No. In fact, I wanted to thank you. Thank me? Margaret picked up the drawing, holding it so Maria could see. Your son gave me this last night. It's been a long time since anyone drew me smiling. Maria's expression softened as she studied the crayon artwork. He likes to draw, always has since he was tiny. I tell Luis we should get him art lessons, but lessons cost money. Everything costs money. Maria's voice carried the weight of 1,000 small sacrifices. But Diego, he doesn't complain. He uses the crayons from school, draws on whatever paper we have. He's got such talent, Miss Chen. Such imagination. Margaret looked at the drawing again, seeing not just childhood art but potential raw and unrefined, but unmistakably there. Mrs. Martinez, what would you say if I told you there might be a way to help Diego develop that talent? I'd say we can't afford charity. The words were spoken with quiet pride, the dignity of people who'd learned to survive on their own strength. It wouldn't be charity, Margaret said. It would be an investment. Maria frowned. I don't understand. Margaret didn't understand either, not completely. But she felt something building inside her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with profit margins or strategic planning. Mrs. Martinez, do you believe in second chances? I believe in hard work. So do I. But sometimes hard work isn't enough. Sometimes we all need someone to believe in us. Maria studied Margaret's face, searching for hidden agendas or false promises. What are you saying? Margaret took a breath, committing to something she couldn't yet name. I'm saying I'd like to help. Your family, Diego's education, his art. There are programs, scholarships, opportunities. But first, I need to ask you something. Okay, would you trust me? Would you let me try to make a difference? Maria was quiet for a long moment, weighing risks and possibilities. Why? She asked finally. Why would you want to help us? Margaret looked at the drawing one more time at the stick figure woman with her arms flung wide in celebration. Because your son reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What's that? How to be happy. Maria's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. Miss Chen, if you're serious about this. I am. Then yes. Yes, I trust you. Margaret felt something unlock in her chest, a door she'd kept bolted for years, finally swinging open. Good, she said. Because I have some ideas. End of part 2, ready for part 3. 3 weeks later, Margaret found herself in places she'd never imagined going. The Rainier Community Center sat in a neighborhood where her BMW looked as out of place as a diamond in a toolbox. Chain-link fences bordered cracked sidewalks, and corner stores advertised check-cashing services behind bulletproof glass. This was where Maria Martinez brought Diego for his new art classes Margaret had quietly arranged and anonymously funded. She sat in her car across the street, watching through rain-streaked windows as children filed into the building. Diego appeared with his father, his backpack bouncing with each excited step. Even from a distance, Margaret could see the boy's energy, the way he gestured animatedly, while Luis listened with patient attention. They'd been meeting regularly now, Luis, Maria, Diego, and Margaret. Coffee shop conversations that had evolved into something resembling friendship, though Margaret still struggled with the unfamiliar territory of genuine human connection. The changes had started small. New company policies regarding employee children on premises. A discreet scholarship fund for employee families facing educational expenses. Upgraded break room facilities with study spaces for working parents. But the real changes were in Margaret herself, and those were harder to quantify. Her phone buzzed. David's name appeared on the screen for the dozenth time that week. She turned off the phone without answering. The art center's doors opened, and children began streaming out. Diego appeared, clutching a folder against his chest, his face glowing with the particular joy of creative accomplishment. Luis ruffled his son's hair, and Margaret felt something twist in her stomach, a longing she couldn't quite name. Her own phone began ringing from the passenger seat where she'd dropped it. The screen showed Rebecca's number. Yes? Miss Chen, where are you? The Henderson presentation starts in 20 minutes, and you're not in the building. Margaret looked at her watch. 3:15. She'd been sitting here for over an hour, watching other people's lives unfold. Reschedule it. I can't reschedule it again. This is the third time this month. The Henderson Group is threatening to take their business elsewhere. The Henderson Group represented $8 million in annual revenue. A month ago, Margaret would have been in that conference room an hour early, armed with charts and projections and the killer instinct that had built her empire. Now she watched Diego skip toward his father's old Honda and felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The desire to be somewhere else. Tell Henderson we'll provide the presentation materials digitally. Full proposal by end of business tomorrow. Miss Chen, they specifically requested a face-to-face. Then they'll have to settle for digital or find another consulting firm. Silence on the line. Margaret could picture Rebecca's expression, the carefully concealed panic of an assistant whose boss had suddenly become unpredictable. Is everything okay? Rebecca asked carefully. Margaret watched Luis help Diego into the car, both of them laughing about something private and wonderful. I'm working on it, she said. That evening, Margaret did something unprecedented. She left the office at 5:30. The elevator descended through floors of employees still bent over computers, still chasing deadlines and quarterly targets. Margaret watched the numbers decrease, each floor carrying her further from the world she'd built and closer to something she couldn't yet define. Instead of going home to her sterile condo, she drove to Pike Place Market. The late afternoon crowd was thinning, vendors beginning to pack up their displays of flowers and fresh fish. Margaret walked among the stalls, breathing in the scent of coffee and salt air, watching tourists take photos of flying salmon and street musicians. When was the last time she'd walked anywhere without purpose? When was the last time she'd simply observed the world instead of calculating how to profit from it? She stopped at a flower vendor, drawn by the riot of colors on flowers and roses and lilies arranged in galvanized buckets. The elderly woman behind the counter smiled, her hands stained with soil and stem sap. "Something for someone special?" she asked. Margaret almost said no, almost walked away from the unfamiliar impulse that had brought her here. "Yes," she said instead, "for a boy who likes to draw." The woman's smile widened. "How old?" 8. 8 is a good age for sunflowers, bright and happy like kids should be. She wrapped 3 large sunflowers in brown paper, their golden faces nodding with each step as Margaret carried them back to her car. The Martinez apartment was in a complex that had seen better decades, faded siding and patchy grass, playground equipment that looked like it needed repair. Margaret sat in her car for 10 minutes, second-guessing the impulse that had brought her here. What was she doing? What did she hope to accomplish with 3 sunflowers and good intentions? Before she could change her mind, she knocked on the door marked 4B. Luis answered, still wearing his work clothes from his day job at a warehouse. His eyes widened when he saw Margaret standing in the hallway, holding flowers and looking as uncertain as she felt. "Miss Chen, is everything okay? I brought these for Diego." "For his room, maybe," I thought. She trailed off, realizing how ridiculous she must look. A CEO in a $1,000 suit delivering grocery store flowers to a family she barely knew. "Papa?" Diego appeared beside his father, wearing paint-stained clothes and a grin that could power the building. "Ms. Chen, you came to our house." The boy's uncomplicated joy cut through Margaret's self-consciousness. "I brought you something," she said, kneeling to his level and offering the flowers. Diego's eyes went wide. "They're like the sun." "That's what I thought too. Maria." Luis called toward the kitchen. "We have company." Maria appeared, wiping her hands on a dish towel. The small apartment smelled like something warm and spiced dinner cooked with love rather than convenience. "Miss Chen, what a surprise." "Please, come in." Margaret stepped into their world, taking in details that told the story of a family making the most of what they had. Furniture that was old but carefully maintained. Artwork, Diego's artwork covering every available wall space. A small table set for 3, with mismatched chairs and cloth napkins that had been mended more than once. It was the opposite of Margaret's minimalist condo, and it felt more like home than anywhere she'd lived in years. "Diego was just showing us what he learned at art class today," Maria said, gesturing toward the kitchen table where papers and art supplies were scattered. "Diego, show Miss Chen your painting." The boy ran to the table and returned with a watercolor that took Margaret's breath away. It wasn't the stick figure simplicity of his first drawing. This was something more sophisticated, showing real instruction and budding technique. A family portrait. 3 figures standing in front of a small house, holding hands beneath a sky full of stars. The colors were rich and confident, the faces expressive despite their simplified features. "It's beautiful," Margaret said and meant it. "My teacher says I have natural ability," Diego reported proudly. "She's going to enter my painting in a contest at the art museum." "Diego's been talking about art class nonstop," Luis said. "Chen, I don't know how to thank you for arranging this. The scholarship, the classes. You don't need to thank me." "Yes, we do," Maria said firmly. "What you've done for our family. It's changing Diego's life." Margaret looked at the boy, who was carefully arranging the sunflowers in a mason jar, his tongue poking out in concentration. "He's changing mine, too," she said quietly. They invited her to stay for dinner, and Margaret found herself accepting the first time in years she'd eaten a meal she hadn't ordered from a restaurant or heated in a microwave. Maria's cooking was simple but perfect. Rice and beans with chicken that fell off the bone, corn tortillas made by hand, agua fresca sweetened with real fruit. They ate at the small table, elbows bumping, conversation flowing around topics that had nothing to do with profit margins or market share. Diego chattered about school, about his art teacher, about the contest he might win. Luis talked about his dreams of starting his own small business someday, maybe lawn care or handyman services. Maria shared stories from her hospital shifts, the small moments of human connection that made the long hours worthwhile. Margaret mostly listened, absorbing the rhythm of family life, the easy intimacy of people who genuinely cared about each other's daily struggles and small victories. "Miss Chen," Diego said as Maria served flan for dessert, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you have a family?" The question hit Margaret like a physical blow. She set down her spoon, suddenly aware of how the silence stretched. "No," she said finally, "I don't." "Why not?" "Diego," Luis warned gently, "that's personal." "It's okay," Margaret said. She looked at the boy's curious face, remembering her younger self, equally direct, equally unafraid of difficult questions. "I used to think I was too busy for family, too focused on work." "But you're not busy now," Diego pointed out with 8-year-old logic. "You're here having dinner with us." Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "You're right. I'm not busy now. So maybe you could get a family now?" The adults sat in uncomfortable silence, but Diego continued with the relentless optimism of childhood. "You could adopt someone, or get married. My teacher says it's never too late to start over." Start over. Margaret looked around the table at these people who had somehow, without her noticing, become precious to her. Luis with his quiet dignity, Maria with her fierce love, Diego with his boundless hope. When was the last time she'd sat at a table with people who cared whether she was happy? When was the last time anyone had asked about her dreams instead of her quarterly projections? "Your teacher sounds very wise," Margaret said. After dinner, Diego insisted on showing Margaret his room, a small space he shared with art supplies and dreams bigger than the cramped quarters could contain. More artwork covered the walls, each piece showing progression, growth, raw talent being nurtured into something extraordinary. "This is my favorite," Diego said, pointing to a drawing Margaret hadn't seen before. It showed 4 figures standing together in front of a tall building, a man in work clothes, a woman in scrubs, a small boy with a paintbrush, and a woman in a business suit. They were all smiling, their arms around each other's shoulders. "Who's the woman in the suit?" Margaret asked, though she already knew. "That's you," Diego said matter-of-factly. "You're part of our family now." Margaret knelt beside the boy's bed, studying the drawing with swimming eyes. "Diego, what made you draw this?" "Because you're different now," he said with the clarity of childhood insight. "When I first saw you, you looked sad even though you were important. Now you look happy even when you're not smiling." Margaret touched the drawn figures, 4 people standing together against the world. "Can I keep this one too?" she asked. "You can keep all of them if you want. I'll just make more." Margaret hugged the boy impulsively, breathing in the scent of art supplies and childhood shampoo. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." As she prepared to leave, Luis walked her to the door. "Miss Chen, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." "What is it?" "Why us? You could help anyone, donate to any charity. Why our family?" Margaret looked back into the apartment, where Maria was helping Diego pack up his art supplies and the sunflowers glowed golden in the kitchen window. "Because Diego saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed," she said. "And because sometimes the most important business decisions have nothing to do with business." She drove home through Seattle's neon-lit streets, the family portrait carefully secured in her passenger seat. The condo felt impossibly empty after the warmth of the Martinez apartment, her designer furniture cold and impersonal. Margaret propped Diego's latest drawing on her kitchen counter, next to the first one, the stick figure woman with her arms flung wide. Looking at them together, she could see the progression not just in Diego's artistic ability, but in her own journey from isolation to connection. Her phone had 14 missed calls from David, but she ignored them. Instead, she opened her laptop and began researching art schools. Not just local programs, but the best institutions in the country. places where truly gifted children could develop their talents, where scholarships might be available for families who couldn't afford tuition. She worked until nearly midnight, taking notes, making lists, planning a future that extended far beyond quarterly projections. For the first time in years, Margaret Chen was building something that had nothing to do with profit, and everything to do with hope. End of Part 3. Ready for Part 4. The boardroom on the 36th floor had never felt smaller. Margaret sat at the head of the mahogany table, facing 8 of her senior executives and 3 external investors. The quarterly reports spread before them told a story of declining focus, missed opportunities, and a CEO who had seemingly lost her edge. Revenue is down 12% from last quarter, David said, his voice carrying the particular coldness reserved for professional disappointment. He'd flown in from San Francisco specifically for this meeting, and his presence filled the room with tension. The Henderson Group contract went to Blackstone Consulting. Morrison Industries canceled their renewal, and we lost the TechFlow bid because I wasn't willing to commit to their timeline, Margaret finished. Exactly. David's eyes were hard. Margaret, what's happening here? This isn't the company we've built together. Margaret looked around the table at faces that had once felt like family people who'd worked beside her for years, who'd celebrated victories and weathered setbacks. Now they looked at her with confusion and barely concealed frustration. Maybe it's time for the company to evolve, she said quietly. Evolve into what? This from Jennifer Walsh, her CFO. We're hemorrhaging clients, Margaret. Our reputation is that we deliver results at any cost. Maybe that's what needs to change. The silence that followed was deafening. David leaned forward, his voice dropping to the persuasive tone she'd once found charming. Margaret, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. You're having some kind of personal crisis, and it's affecting your judgment. But we can fix this. Take a sabbatical, get some perspective, and when you come back... I'm not having a crisis, Margaret interrupted. I'm having a revelation. She stood and walked to the windows overlooking the city. Somewhere down there Diego was in school, probably sketching in the margins of his math homework. Luis was working his day job at the warehouse, counting hours until he could pick up his son and hear about art class. Maria was starting her shift at the hospital, caring for strangers with the same fierce attention she gave her own family. I spent 20 years building this company, Margaret said, not turning around. 20 years focused on growth, profit, market dominance. And you know what I discovered? What? David's voice was tight. I was building a monument to my own loneliness. She turned back to face the room. Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. How many of you have children? She asked. The question clearly caught them off guard. Slowly, 5 hands went up. When was the last time you saw them perform in a school play, or helped with homework, or just sat with them while they drew pictures? Jennifer frowned. Margaret, what does this have to do with quarterly projections? Everything. Margaret returned to her seat but didn't sit down. We've created a culture where success means sacrificing everything else, where being a good employee means being a mediocre parent, spouse, human being. That's the price of excellence, David said. That's what separates winners from what? From people who are actually happy? Margaret thought of the Martinez family's dinner table, the easy laughter and genuine affection, the way Diego's eyes lit up when he talked about his art, the pride in Luis's voice when he spoke about his son's achievements. I met a boy recently, she continued. 8 years old. His father works nights cleaning our offices for $28,000 a year. This boy has more artistic talent in his little finger than most adults will ever possess. And he's growing up in poverty because our definition of valuable work is completely backwards. So what are you suggesting? This from Marcus Reed, head of operations. That we turn into a charity? I'm suggesting we remember that businesses are made up of human beings, and human beings deserve more than just a paycheck. David stood abruptly, his composure finally cracking. This is insane, Margaret. You're talking about dismantling everything we've worked for because some janitor's kid drew you a picture? The contempt in his voice ignited something fierce in Margaret's chest. That janitor has more integrity in his work boots than most CEOs have in their entire bodies. And his son. She paused, thinking of Diego's gap-toothed grin, his absolute faith that the world held infinite possibilities. His son reminded me what it feels like to hope for something bigger than myself. Hope doesn't pay the bills. David shot back. Neither does misery. But we've been selling that for years. The room erupted in frustrated murmurs. Margaret held up her hand for silence. I've made some decisions, she said. First, we're implementing a comprehensive family support program, childcare assistance, flexible scheduling, educational scholarships for employee children. The cost will be enormous, Jennifer protested. Less than we spent on executive bonuses last year. Margaret. Second, we're partnering with local community organizations to provide free consulting services for small businesses and nonprofits. Pro bono work doesn't generate revenue, Marcus pointed out. It generates goodwill, employee satisfaction, and community connections, all of which have long-term value. This is corporate suicide, David said flatly. Margaret looked at him, really looked at him. 2 years of dating, and she'd never noticed how cold his eyes were. How calculating. Had she once looked at the world the same way? David, I think we need to talk. Privately. The other executives filed out, leaving Margaret and David alone in the glass-walled room. Below them, Seattle pulsed with afternoon traffic and human ambition. What happened to you? David asked, his voice softer now, almost pleading. The woman I fell in love with was driven, focused, unstoppable. This person talking about family programs and pro bono work, I don't even recognize her. Margaret studied his face, searching for some trace of the man she'd thought she cared about. Maybe you never really knew me. Maybe I never really knew myself. That's not true. We're perfect together, Margaret. We understand each other's ambitions, we support each other's goals, we enable each other's emptiness. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. I love you, he said. No, you don't. Margaret's voice was gentle but certain. You love what I represent. Success, status, the power couple image. But when did you last ask me what I was afraid of, what I dreamed about besides quarterly projections? David stopped, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. When was the last time we talked about anything that mattered? Really mattered? Our work matters. Building something together matters. Building what? Another acquisition? Another merger? Another way to maximize profit while minimizing human connection? Margaret walked to her desk and picked up Diego's drawing the family portrait, showing 4 figures standing together. She held it so David could see. This boy drew me into his family, she said. Not because of what I own or what I've achieved, but because he saw something in me worth saving. When was the last time you looked at me that way? David stared at the drawing with undisguised disgust. Margaret, you can't be serious. You're going to destroy your career for some fantasy about playing house with your janitor's family? The words hung in the air between them, revealing everything Margaret needed to know about David's character and about the person she'd been when she chose him. I'm not destroying my career, she said quietly. I'm saving my life. It's the same thing, only if you believe that work is all we are. That success is the only thing that matters. Isn't it? Margaret looked at him, this man she'd thought she loved, this reflection of everything she'd once believed about herself, and felt nothing but sadness for the years they'd both wasted chasing empty victories. No, she said. It's really not. David left without another word, taking with him the last remnants of Margaret's old life. That evening, Margaret drove to the community center where Diego's art class met. She'd been attending regularly now, not as a benefactor but as a friend sitting in the back, while 12 children between ages 6 and 10 explored color and form under the patient guidance of Mrs. Rodriguez, a retired art teacher who volunteered her time. Diego waved when he saw her, paint-stained fingers holding a brush loaded with cerulean blue. Miss Chen, look what I'm making. He'd progressed beyond simple drawings into ambitious paintings that showed remarkable sophistication for his age. Tonight's project was a landscape, mountains and sky rendered with the kind of confident brushstrokes that suggested natural ability combined with good instruction. "It's beautiful," Margaret said, meaning it. "Mrs. Rodriguez says I might be ready for advanced classes soon. But those cost more money." Margaret glanced at the teacher, who was helping another student mix colors. They'd spoken several times about Diego's exceptional talent, about opportunities that existed for truly gifted children if resources could be found. "What if money wasn't a problem?" Margaret asked. "What would you want to study?" Diego's eyes lit up. "Everything. Painting and drawing and sculpture and maybe even animation. Mrs. Rodriguez showed us this video about people who make movies with computers, and it looked like magic." Margaret smiled, thinking about the research she'd been doing: elite art programs, summer intensives, eventually college scholarships for exceptional students. She'd already set aside funds for Diego's education, money that would ensure his talent never went undeveloped for lack of opportunity. But more than that, she'd been exploring possibilities for other children like Diego, kids with gifts that might otherwise be overlooked because their families couldn't afford to nurture them. The Chen Foundation, she'd decided to call it, a non-profit focused on identifying and supporting exceptional young talent in underserved communities. It would be her real legacy. "Ms. Chen?" Diego tugged at her sleeve. "Are you okay? You look like you're thinking really hard." "I'm thinking about possibilities," she said. "Good possibilities or scary possibilities?" Margaret laughed, a sound that had become more frequent lately, more genuine. "The best possibilities are usually a little bit of both." As the class ended and parents arrived to collect their children, Margaret found herself walking with Luis and Diego toward the parking lot. The evening air was crisp with approaching autumn, and the first stars were appearing above the city's glow. "Diego's teacher says he's ready for more advanced instruction," Luis said quietly. "But the programs she's recommending, they're expensive." "We'll figure something out," Margaret said. Luis stopped walking. "Miss Chen, you've already done so much for our family. We can't keep accepting." "Yes, you can." Margaret faced him in the parking lot, Diego skipping ahead toward their cars. "Luis, do you know what I learned from your son?" "What?" "That generosity isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you can't afford not to give." Luis frowned, not understanding. "I spent so many years accumulating wealth, accumulating success, accumulating things that were supposed to make me happy. But I was slowly dying inside. Your family, Diego's drawing, your wife's kindness, your own dignity in the face of impossible circumstances, you saved me. We didn't do anything special. You treated me like a human being instead of a business opportunity. You invited me into your lives without expecting anything in return. You showed me what family looks like, what love looks like, what hope looks like." Margaret's voice caught. "So, when I help Diego pursue his dreams, I'm not being charitable, I'm being selfish. Because his happiness has become essential to mine." Luis was quiet for a long moment, processing her words. "Ms. Chen," he said finally, "there's something Maria and I have been talking about, something we'd like to ask you. What is it?" "Diego's school is having a family art show next month. Students can invite anyone they consider family to display artwork together." Luis looked embarrassed but determined. "We were wondering, would you be Diego's family guest?" Margaret felt her throat close with emotion. "You want me to be part of his family for the art show?" "You already are part of his family, part of our family. We just want to make it official." Margaret looked across the parking lot where Diego was drawing pictures in the condensation on car windows, oblivious to the magnitude of what his father was offering. "Yes," she whispered, "I would be honored." They stood together in the gathering darkness, three people whose lives had intersected by chance and intertwined by choice. In the distance, Diego's laughter echoed off concrete walls, the sound of pure joy that asked nothing of the world except permission to exist. Margaret Chen, who had spent 20 years building an empire, realized she had finally found her way home. 6 months later, Margaret stood in the Jefferson Elementary School cafeteria, surrounded by folding tables covered in children's artwork and the warm chaos of proud families. The annual art show had transformed the utilitarian space into a gallery of 8-year-old dreams, rendered in watercolor and crayon. She wore jeans and a simple blue sweater clothes that would have horrified her corporate self, but felt perfect for this moment. Around her neck hung a small pendant, a gift from Diego, a hand-painted ceramic sun that caught the fluorescent light and threw golden reflections across her collar space. "Miss Margaret?" Diego appeared at her elbow, practically vibrating with excitement. He'd started calling her Ms. Margaret instead of Miss Chen months ago, and the casual intimacy of it still made her heart skip. "You have to see our display. Papa set it up just like we planned." He tugged her through the crowd toward a corner table, where Luis was making final adjustments to their presentation. Margaret's breath caught when she saw what they'd created. The display told a story in pictures, Diego's artistic journey from those first crayon drawings to his current sophisticated watercolors. But more than that, it chronicled the growth of their unconventional family. Photos of art classes, community center visits, and quiet dinners around the Martinez kitchen table. Pictures of Margaret teaching Diego to use her laptop for digital art, of Luis helping him build an easel in their apartment, of Maria framing his paintings with proud ceremony. At the center of it all hung Diego's latest masterpiece, a large canvas painted with oils he'd learned to use in his advanced Saturday classes. It showed a city skyline at sunset, but instead of anonymous buildings, each structure was filled with windows containing small scenes of daily life, families cooking dinner, children playing, people helping each other through ordinary moments of grace. "It's called Home," Diego announced proudly. "Mrs. Rodriguez says it might be good enough for the youth gallery at the art museum." Margaret studied the painting, amazed once again by the boy's talent and vision. But what struck her most was the warmth radiating from every brushstroke, the deep understanding of community that only came from being truly loved. "It's perfect," she said. "Almost perfect," Diego corrected. "I wanted to add one more window, but I ran out of room." "What would you have painted?" "You?" he said simply. "In your office, but not working. Just sitting and looking happy." Margaret felt the familiar tightness in her throat that came whenever Diego's innocent observations hit too close to truth. "Diego, can I tell you a secret?" "Sure." "I am happy. Happier than I've ever been in my life." The boy grinned, gap-toothed and radiant. "I know. You smile all the time now." Maria appeared beside them, carrying cups of punch and wearing the kind of dress she saved for special occasions. Over the past months, she and Margaret had developed an easy friendship built on shared investment in Diego's future and mutual respect for each other's strength. "Ms. Margaret, did you see the newspaper photographer?" Maria pointed across the room, where a woman with a camera was documenting the event. "She wants to take pictures of Diego's display for the community section." "That's wonderful." "It's because of the scholarship," Luis said, joining their group. "Word got out about the Chen Foundation, and now everyone wants to know about the CEO who started an art program for underprivileged kids." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. The local media attention had been unexpected and largely unwelcome. She'd started the foundation quietly, preferring to work behind the scenes rather than court publicity. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about kids like Diego who deserve opportunities." "But you're the one creating those opportunities," Maria pointed out. 20 children are getting art instruction. They couldn't afford otherwise. 3 families have received college prep scholarships. You've changed lives, Ms. Margaret. Margaret looked around the cafeteria at families celebrating their children's creativity. How many of these kids had untapped potential? How many dreams were being deferred because of economics rather than ability? "We've changed lives," she corrected. "All of us together." The newspaper photographer approached their group, camera ready. "Excuse me, are you Margaret Chen?" Margaret nodded reluctantly. "I'm Jessica Santos from the Seattle Times. Could I get a photo of you with Diego and his family?" Our readers would love to see the personal side of your foundation work. Actually, Margaret said, I'd prefer if you focused on Diego and his art. He's the real story here. But the human interest angle is about a gifted child getting the education he deserves. That's the story that matters. The photographer looked disappointed but began setting up shots of Diego with his paintings. Margaret stepped back, content to watch from the sidelines. You know, Louise said quietly, appearing beside her, 6 months ago you would have posed for that photo. 6 months ago I would have staged the whole event for maximum publicity impact. What changed? Margaret considered the question, watching Diego pose proudly next to his artwork, while his parents beamed in the background. I learned the difference between being seen and being known. Luis nodded, understanding more than his formal education might suggest. Miss Margaret, can I ask you something personal? Of course. Do you ever miss it? Your old life, I mean. The power, the recognition? Margaret thought about her transformed company, smaller now, less profitable by traditional metrics, but somehow more meaningful. Several executives had left when she implemented the family support programs, but others had stepped up with renewed enthusiasm. The pro bono work had led to unexpected partnerships and a reputation for integrity that attracted clients seeking more than just results. I miss the certainty, she said honestly. It was easier when success had a clear definition, when I knew exactly what I was supposed to want. And now? Now I have to figure out what actually makes me happy instead of what I think should make me happy. It's terrifying and wonderful. The photographer finished with Diego and approached Margaret again. Miss Chen, just one photo? Our readers really are interested in your story. It's not often we see this kind of corporate philanthropy. Margaret looked at Diego, who was explaining his painting technique to a group of fascinated adults. His confidence had grown tremendously over the past months, nurtured by success and genuine encouragement. All right, she said, but I want Diego in the photo too, and his parents. This isn't my story, it's a family story. They arranged themselves around Diego's display, Margaret standing slightly behind the Martinez family, her hand resting gently on Diego's shoulder. As the camera clicked, she felt the profound rightness of her position, not in front, leading or commanding, but as part of something larger than herself. Later, as families began packing up artwork and folding chairs, Margaret found herself helping Luis dismantle their display. Diego had run off to say goodbye to classmates, his energy finally starting to flag after hours of excitement. Ms. Margaret, Maria said, carefully wrapping Diego's oil painting in tissue paper. Luis and I have been talking about something. What is it? The couple exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. We know you don't have family nearby, Luis said, and with the holidays coming up, we'd like you to spend Thanksgiving with us, Maria finished. If you want to. We know you probably have other plans. I don't, Margaret said quickly. I don't have other plans. Then you'll come? Margaret thought about previous Thanksgiving catered meals eaten alone while reviewing quarterly reports, or obligatory appearances at David's family gatherings where she felt like an outsider observing someone else's traditions. I'd love to, she said. But only if you let me bring dessert. Deal, Maria laughed. Diego reappeared, dragging his feet with exhaustion but still glowing with pride. Margaret, did you see how many people liked my paintings? I did. You should be very proud. I am. And you know what the best part is? What? Next year, I'll be even better. And maybe you can teach me how to use that computer art program you showed me. Margaret knelt down to his level, struck once again by his boundless optimism. Diego, can I tell you something? Yeah. You've taught me more than I could ever teach you. What did I teach you? Margaret touched the ceramic sun pendant at her throat, remembering the moment Diego had presented it to her with ceremony and shy pride. You taught me that some gifts can't be measured in dollars. That success isn't about what you accumulate, but about what you give away. That family isn't just about blood, it's about choice. Diego nodded solemnly, processing her words with the gravity children brought to important conversations. Ms. Margaret? Yes? Are you glad you're part of our family? Margaret looked around the cafeteria, now mostly empty except for custodial staff beginning to restore order. This room where she'd discovered that her real life had been waiting for her all along, disguised as someone else's child's art show. I'm the luckiest person in the world, she said. 3 weeks later, Margaret sat at the Martinez family's kitchen table, watching Diego add finishing touches to place cards for their Thanksgiving dinner. The small apartment smelled like turkey and cinnamon, and Maria had been cooking since dawn despite Margaret's offers to help. No, Maria had insisted. This is my gift to you. Let me give it. The place cards were miniature works of art, each guest's name surrounded by hand-drawn images representing their personalities. Margaret showed a woman in a business suit, surrounded by paintbrushes and sunflowers. That's how I see you, Diego explained when she picked up her card. Fancy, but also colorful. Margaret's phone buzzed with text messages, business associates, extending perfunctory holiday wishes. David making one last attempt at reconciliation that she'd ignore like all the others. She turned off the phone and slipped it into her purse. Is it okay if I ask a favor? She said to Luis, who was carving the turkey with ceremonial precision. Anything. Could we go around the table and say what we're grateful for? I know it's traditional, but I've never actually done it. Of course, Maria said. Diego, you start. The boy stood up formally, his place card clutched in small hands. I'm grateful for art class, and for my painting getting into the museum show, and for Ms. Margaret becoming part of our family. He sat down with a satisfied thump, and Luis stood next. I'm grateful for my family's health, for steady work, and for learning that good things sometimes come from unexpected places. Maria rose gracefully. I'm grateful for my son's talents, for my husband's strength, and for friends who become family. All eyes turned to Margaret. She stood slowly, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment. I'm grateful, she began, then stopped, her voice catching. 6 months ago, she would have listed professional achievements, stock prices, market position. Today, surrounded by the warmth of genuine affection, those accomplishments felt meaningless. I'm grateful for a 8-year-old boy who saw something in me that I'd forgotten existed, for parents who raised him to be generous with his gifts, for the reminder that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold or measured in quarterly reports. She paused, looking at each face around the small table. I'm grateful for discovering that family is a choice we make every day, and that love grows larger when we share it instead of hoarding it. Margaret sat down, wiping away tears she no longer tried to hide. I'm grateful, she concluded, for coming home. They ate dinner as the rain drummed against windows and the city sparkled beyond. Margaret savored every bite, every laugh, every moment of belonging to something larger than her own ambition. Later, as they cleaned dishes and Diego showed off his latest drawings, Margaret stepped onto the small balcony for air. The view from the 4th floor showed other apartment windows, other families gathered around their own tables, other lives being lived with quiet dignity. Luis joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. Penny for your thoughts, he said. Margaret accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. I was thinking about my father, she said. He died when I was in college, and I always regretted that he never got to see me succeed. But I wonder now, what would he think of the person I became? Would he be proud of the empire I built, or disappointed by the relationships I sacrificed to build it? What do you think? Margaret smiled, remembering calloused hands and patient explanations. I think he'd be proud of tonight, of this family we've made together, of Diego's talents being nurtured instead of ignored. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was. He used to say that the measure of a person wasn't what they achieved for themselves, but what they made possible for others. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the city breathe below them. Miss Margaret, Luis said finally, do you know what Diego told me the other day? What? He said he wants to be an artist when he grows up, but also a businessman. He wants to start a company that helps other kids like him get art education. Margaret felt something warm expand in her chest. He's 8 years old and he's already thinking about legacy. He learned that from watching you. Margaret looked through the sliding door at Diego, who was showing Maria a new sketch with animated gestures. His future stretched ahead like a blank canvas, rich with possibility. Luis, there's something I've been meaning to tell you about Diego's education. The scholarship for advanced classes? We can't thank you enough. Not just classes, college, art school, whatever he needs to develop his talents fully. Margaret turned to face Luis directly. I've set up a trust fund for Diego's education, full tuition, living expenses, supplies, from now through graduate school if he chooses. Luis stared at her, speechless. You don't have to worry about money limiting his opportunities ever again. Miss Margaret, we can't accept. Yes, you can, because it's not charity, Luis, it's investment. I believe in Diego's future, and I want to be part of making it possible. Luis's eyes filled with tears. How do we ever repay something like that? Margaret thought about the question seriously. You keep being the family that saved my life. You keep loving your son unconditionally. You keep showing him that success means lifting others up, not climbing over them. She paused, looking back at Diego's bright face through the glass. And you let me be part of watching him grow into the remarkable man he's going to become. Luis nodded. Unable to speak, they returned inside to find Diego asleep on the couch, a half-finished drawing still clutched in his hand. Margaret looked at the sketch another family portrait, but this time showing 4 figures standing in front of an art museum, all of them smiling. He drew you accepting an award, Maria whispered, for the foundation work. Margaret studied the image herself standing with the Martinez family, holding what looked like a certificate or plaque. In Diego's imagination, their unconventional family was being honored together. You know what? Margaret said softly. I think he might be right about that. As she prepared to leave, Margaret hugged each member of her chosen family goodbye. Diego stirred enough to mumble sleepy thanks for coming, his small arms tight around her neck. I love you, Miss Margaret, he whispered. I love you too, sweetheart. The words came easily now, no longer foreign or frightening. Margaret drove home through quiet streets, past houses glowing with warm light and families settling in for the evening. Her condo felt different when she unlocked the door, not empty anymore, just peaceful. A place to rest between the important moments that happened elsewhere. She hung Diego's ceramic sun pendant on her bedside lamp, where it caught the light and threw golden reflections across the room. Then she sat at her kitchen counter with a cup of tea and opened her laptop, not to work on quarterly projections or market analysis, but to research art programs for underprivileged children, to plan the expansion of the Chen Foundation, to write emails to other CEOs about corporate social responsibility, to build something that would outlast quarterly earnings and stock prices, to create a legacy measured in dreams made possible rather than profits accumulated. Margaret worked until nearly midnight, surrounded by the warm silence of a life finally lived with purpose. Outside her windows, Seattle slept and dreamed, and somewhere in a small apartment across town, an 8-year-old boy clutched a paintbrush in his sleep and smiled. She touched the ceramic sun one more time before turning off the light. Grateful beyond measure for the day, a child's drawing had shown her the way home to herself. In the darkness, Margaret Chen finally understood what her father had tried to teach her so many years ago, that the most important business was the business of being human, and the greatest success was measured not in what you gained, but in what you gave away. And in the quiet of that recognition, she smiled the kind of smile that Diego had captured in crayon arms flung wide, embracing a world full of possibility.